Chapter 11 of Mystery at Number 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Mystery at Number 6 by Augusta Heel Seaman. Chapter 11. The Force of a Promise. On the way home, they tried to forget Ike, and Sidney gave Bernice an account of his interview with Mr. Treadwell the previous evening. "He was sitting on the veranda smoking when I came out after bringing you folks home from our bungalow. I didn't think of speaking to him. Singularly enough, he opened the conversation with me by asking if I happened to have a match about me. I always carry a box around in my pocket, so I obliged him, and gradually we got to talking. It ended in my sitting down by him and remaining there till nearly midnight. He's a very interesting man, has travelled all over, especially in Florida, and knows the state like a book. And, by the way, we found out that he had known your mother's father very well, had gone to the same college with him, though he graduated 2 or 3 years later than your grandfather, but was quite a friend of his. They rather lost sight of each other in later years, for he went to Europe for a long stay. But he was very much interested, and wanted to meet you and your mother. Queer how small the world is, isn't it?" "That'll make it all the easier to get acquainted with him, won't it?" interrupted Bernice. "No trouble at all about that," declared Sidney. "I'll introduce him all around tonight. But that isn't all we talked about. By and by we got to discussing this town and the people in it, and the queer specimens you see coming in from the wild outside districts. He began it by speaking particularly about a curious cracker fellow who'd tackled him that day for a job in the mines. Said he was a good hand to make other fellows work, and would like to be a foreman. Mr. Treadwell had a hard time assuring the chap that he didn't have anything to do with hiring the mine workers. Then he went on to speak of other queer characters he'd come across, and suddenly, to my amazement, he asked me if I'd ever noticed that half-Indian chap who came to town once in a while. I wondered just how much I ought to tell him, how much I could tell him without breaking that promise to the kid, but concluded it wouldn't do any harm to admit at least to seeing Jerry. So I said yes, I had seen him once or twice. He went on to say that he had reason to be more than usually interested in that particular person. In fact, would like very much to meet him and have a talk with him. Then he told me the incident of last Saturday, when he saw Jerry in line at the movie show, and tried to get across to him, and found him gone when he managed to reach the other side of the street. I asked him if he'd ever met Jerry before. What do you think he said? Yes, once, down in Fort Lauderdale. See how that dovetails in with what little Delight told us? Remember her saying that Jerry left there once in pretty much of a hurry and went deep into the Glades for a long time afterward. I spoke quite casually about Jerry being a famous guide and trapper in the Glades, and he said yes, so he'd heard, but that there was something else that was singular about him besides that. And then, here Sidney paused dramatically, he up and asked me if I knew that Jerry had in his care a girl who, it was thought, did not belong to him. I was really put to it to answer him. If I admitted I knew, it might involve Delight, and yet I couldn't very well say that I didn't. So I compromised by simply remarking, "Is that so?" He went on to say that he had heard so when he was down at Fort Lauderdale some years before, but when he met Jerry and had questioned him about it, Jerry had denied it flatly, and then disappeared for good. But he said he had been asking some questions about the town here concerning the guide, and found that it was rumoured that he did have the child with him, though no one had seen her, and that he was also supposed to be married to a cracker woman rather recently. He said that he hadn't discovered just where he lived yet, but when he did, was going to try to have another interview with him. I didn't say a word about my knowing where Jerry lived, but just let him ramble on and tell me all he would. He went on to say that there were very serious legal reasons why he should talk to the fellow, that he had been trying to find him for years without success, and that it was utterly unexpected coming across him in this region. He had certainly never dreamed of finding him anywhere but around the Everglades. Of course, I was absolutely handicapped by that promise to Delight, and could not tell him a thing I knew, partly because I haven't figured out yet whether his business with Jerry will bring more trouble to her or not, and partly because it didn't seem fair to the whole outfit at Number 6, or rather that were once of Number 6. I can't feel that they are criminals, or anything like that, and I want to know more about what Mr. Treadwell wants with them before I give him so much as a hint, if I ever do. I didn't get any more out of him after that, for it was growing so late that we both decided to go to bed. But you can see now that we are in for some new developments perhaps through him. I'll stay to dinner with you folks tonight at the hotel and get a chance to introduce you all afterward. In the pleasant twilight after supper, on the hotel veranda, they found Mr. Treadwell sitting in a corner by himself, smoking the inevitable cigar, and apparently just enjoying the fading afterglow, glimpsed through the huge live oak trees so heavily draped with Spanish moss. Sydney, walking by with Bernice and her mother, stopped to introduce them, and Mr. Treadwell rose with alacrity, and after the introduction found them all chairs. They discovered him to be a quite delightful and entertaining person, full of enthralling incidents of his many travels, which he could recount very realistically. Mrs. Conant and he spent considerable time exchanging reminiscences of her father, so that in a very short interval they felt quite as if they had known each other all their lives. It was not until the interview was nearly over that Mr. Treadwell electrified the two young folks by turning to Sydney and casually remarking, "Remember that half-Indian chap we were speaking of the other night? I found out quite by chance today that he is supposed to be living out somewhere near one of the old mine pools known as Number 6, some 12 or 14 miles from here. No one could give me the exact location, at least not so as I could find it without some difficulty. I believe you have to leave the main road at a certain point and take some obscure trail through the woods. Now, I am very anxious to get at him as soon as possible, for I can't stay in this region much longer. I have urgent business elsewhere, and more than that, my car is laid up with a broken connecting rod, and won't be ready for use short of 2 or 3 days. I was wondering whether you would, as a favour, be willing to drive me out there tomorrow afternoon in your car, if you weren't otherwise engaged. It's a great deal to ask, I know, but I understood you to say that you knew the region around here pretty thoroughly, and must confess I'd rather take the expedition with you than go in a public taxi. The affair is just a little in the nature of a matter I don't want to make too public." Sydney and Bernice glanced at each other with one startled look. Could anything be more singular than this particular request? Had it come a few days earlier, they would have been hard put to it to know what to reply. As it was, Sydney saw no reason why he should not cheerfully comply. The expedition promised rather interesting and unusual features, indeed. "I'll be delighted to," he replied. "Won't we, Bernice? I've been out that way fishing once in a while. I think I know how to get there without difficulty. We'll all go. Aunt Elsie, wouldn't you like to take the drive too? You haven't been out that way. We can stay in the car, or ramble around and explore the pool while Mr. Treadwell has his interview." But Mrs. Conant thanked them and refused, declaring she had made the engagement to go to Tampa with her sister-in-law next day. As nothing, however, would have persuaded Bernice to give up her chance to be one of this curious expedition, it was arranged that the three should meet at the hotel next afternoon at 2 o'clock. When they were alone, just before Sydney left, he whispered to Bernice, "Isn't this the greatest piece of business you ever heard of, us taking him out to Number 6? Lucky thing the kid isn't there now. Say, he'll get some shock when he finds they've flown the coop again, won't he? But don't you dare to show, by so much as the faintest sign, that you've ever been there before, or have the least inkling about the thing. You'll have to do a nice little bit of acting, I fancy, and I do hope Ike Massey keeps out of the way." "Of course I won't show that I know anything about it," declared Bernice indignantly. "I wouldn't for Delight's sake, anyways. Gracious, I can hardly wait for the time to come." It was with the strangest presentiment of pending complications that they set out on the following afternoon. Bernice